Welcome to the Tempo Storm Meta Snapshot Breakdown. The February balance patch is shaking up the ladder, with many high-tier decks virtually disappearing overnight. Top contenders such as Odd Rogue and Subject 9 Hunter are now significantly weaker and have thus fallen lower in the tier lists. Due to how early it is in the post-nerf meta, it's hard to tell what decks are flavors of the month and which ones will become top-tier mainstays, but the Meta Snapshot captures how the best decks are currently performing. Let's jump right into Tier 1 and see what decks are currently taking advantage of the new patch. For the first time in a long while, Tier 1 only features 2 decks. These decks were refined before the nerfs and weren't significantly impacted by them, leaving them to be in charge of the ladder. As the metagame continues to develop, more decks will join them in Tier 1 from either the wide variety of Tier 2 decks or elsewhere. To no one's surprise, Mid-Range Hunter remains at the top of the tier list. While one of the Mid-Range Hunter's cards was nerfed recently, the deck does not really miss the card all that much. Some matchups, such as against Even Warlock, will be harder, but in general the deck will still prey on most of the weaker ones. Mid-Range Hunter is currently the best and most consistent form of Hunter, but it does have its bad matchups. Odd Aggro Mage and Controlled Priest are both decks that can shut down the Hunter's early game and then take control of the later turns with their own pressure. Against Mage, Hunter struggles to deal with the 2-damage hero power as well as their secrets, and Control Priest simply has too much removal, as well as its reliable burst damage to close out the game. One of the things that makes Mid-Range Hunter so good is its favorable matchups against combo decks. Quest Rogue and Resurrect OTK Priest can't keep up with Hunter's early pressure, which leads to damage closing out games. This Hunter deck beats most of the meta decks, helping it claim its position at the top of the tier list. Resurrect OTK Priest had begun to rise in power before the nerfs were put in place. The deck was already really good, and now with a lot of the good decks being lowered in strength, it has more room to grow. OTK Priest was left entirely untouched by the nerfs, even though many players were hoping some of the cards would be addressed. Resurrect OTK Priest is a deck that has a chance to win even against bad matchups. Only Odd Aggro Mage presents any serious challenge to the Combo Priest deck. This is because of how well-rounded Resurrect OTK Priest's game plan is, which gives players a solid chance to find a win in any spot. One issue is that the deck is fairly complex, leaving a lot of room for human error and decreased win rates. Some matchups that the Priest thrives against are slow decks that can't apply too much pressure early. Decks such as Odd Warrior typically can't out-armor the burst from the Priest, making this matchup very Priest-favored. The nerfs opened up some room for some new decks to appear in the meta. Odd Aggro Mage is starting to see play following the balance changes. While the deck had some presence before the nerfs, the absence of other aggro decks has opened the way for Odd Aggro Mage to be one of the few archetypes to target combo decks. As long as decks with large armor game don't become too popular, this rising mage archetype should stick around. Secret Paladin is a deck that hasn't been a thing in Standard since the rotation of Mysterious Challenger. While this list is much more aggressive than the one players may remember, the deck is still built around secrets. The new Secret Paladin build aims to apply huge amounts of pressure with Secret Keepers snowballing out of control and Call to Arms building large boards. The deck finds popularity with its strong matchups against Hunter and Mage aggro decks. However, any hard control decks will put an end to Secret Paladin's chances of winning. Decks such as Odd Warrior are matchups players wish to avoid. Even Rogue is another deck that players didn't really anticipate being more than theoretical. It wasn't before Nicolina started playing her variation to Legend on stream that the deck began to pick up in popularity. While the deck is low in the tier list, it's still hard to determine whether it'll stick around or rise in the next Meta Snapshot. Either way, it's a debut that few players expected to see in response to the February balance patch. Tier 2 has several more decks than the first tier does. This is due to decks being unrefined and it being difficult to properly assess a deck's power level this early following the nerfs. We have 3 familiar faces to showcase in this breakdown. Before we do, make no mistake. There are a few new decks that have emerged that are showing promise, but it's hard to tell if they'll remain in Tier 2 or will fizzle out in a more stable meta. So let's take a look at the top 3 decks of the second tier. Even Warlock is at the forefront of Tier 2 as the deck hasn't really lost anything with the nerfs. While Even Shaman was a good matchup, Odd Rogue gave Even Warlock a hard time, and both are now functionally obsolete. With Hunter's Mark also being nerfed, Mountain Giants can once again go uncontested against Hunter. With all of these factors combined, Even Warlock is shaping up to establish a good foothold in the coming weeks. Control Priest is another deck that's happy to see the nerfs come into play. Making aggro decks slower gives the Priest more time to assemble both their removal and their combo pieces. This gives the deck time to seal their game plan. Its best matchups come from mid-range decks that essentially lose to removal spells such as Even Warlock or Death Rattle Hunter. Control Priest's worst matchups are either the opposing combo decks whose win conditions are assembled first, or decks that can simply out-armor the Priest damage. Odd Warrior and Miracle Druid are prime examples of this. Control Priest is doing well right now, and it wouldn't surprise anyone to see the deck break into Tier 1 in the future. Lastly, Death Rattle Hunter is a deck that keeps fizzling in and out of the meta. The deck is very dependent on good matchups to thrive, but can still high roll against the bad matchups with a good hand. Odd Paladin hasn't seen much play, so Death Rattle Hunter lost one of its worst matchups. The deck was also untouched by the nerfs, being one of the few Hunter archetypes not to depend on Emerald Spellstone. The best matchups for Death Rattle Hunter are Miracle Druid and Aggro Odd Mage. The Druid struggles to deal with consistent pressure, and the Mage struggles to get value out of their secrets in this matchup. Most of Hunter's unfavorable matchups aren't too bad, but the one that stands out the most is Resurrect OTK Priest. This Priest archetype can easily stave off board-dependent pressure, while building up their Resurrect pool to end the game swiftly. When it comes to countering the meta, a lot of players are experimenting with different archetypes and tech options, making it hard to consistently find a matchup that you're targeting. The best course of action in these early metagames is to typically target as many Tier 1 decks as you can. So if you're seeing both Resurrect OTK Priest and mid-range Hunter frequently, consider picking up Odd Aggro Mage. The deck has pretty heavy favorables against both Tier 1 archetypes. On top of this, the deck is new and relatively unknown. As one of the only true aggro decks remaining in these early days of the post-patch meta, it'll find easy prey against the majority of combo-based decks. In conclusion, the meta is constantly evolving. Every day, players shift over from one deck to another. During the next few weeks, the meta will change, and different decks may claim the top spot or join Tier 1. Let us know in the comments what decks you think will ultimately reign supreme. Thank you for watching our Meta Snapshot Breakdown. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe to stay up to date with our Tempo Storm news and Hearthstone content. Happy laddering!